excitement that we had. And I do appreciate each and every one of y'all coming to hear about this experience. Now, Dr. Marsh.
Tell you what, if you don't mind, I'm going to hold it. Thank you, Jerry. You know, you guys have a lot more confidence in me than I have in myself, thinking I have to be here at 7 o'clock. It's quite an honor to see all these familiar faces. And when I think Jerry asked me to do this talk after he heard it at the Ruritan National meeting, which I did on behalf of Denny Clemmer. You know how Denny was when he wanted you to do something, he would hound you until you got it done. And, you know, God bless his soul, he hounded me still, and that was something I did. And Jerry was there and heard the talk. He said, this would be good to be given at Middlebrook. And I hesitated at first because it's not something that I like that I talk about a lot. And it is very personal for me. However, thinking that doing it in the terms of Veterans Day coming up next Tuesday, and the fact that this country is still at war and will be at war for some time, I think it's worth giving, obviously not to glorify me or the little role I played, but more to give you an idea of the heroism that we have day to day in our military. And I guess also I'd like to take this opportunity, I think, to recognize all those who have served, whether it's peacetime or wartime, because it doesn't really matter. Serving is serving. But also especially recognize the families that had, whether parents or wives or children of those who have served or are still serving, and also those who served in all the services, the Coast Guard, but not just that, but those who serve our community in other ways, the fire department, the police department, and things that keep us together. And if I had to title this talk, I would probably simplify it as it relates to me. I'm going to call it From Middlebrook to Mogadishu to Middlebrook. All right? And I don't know, and it's something that's rather personal to me, so obviously I don't have any notes, and if I tend to be talking too long, Jerry, wave me down and I will stop and close it up. I say when I give this talk, I've given it in different forms. I've given it to some medical talks because there were some lessons learned that we learned medically from that operation, because basically it was really the first time we had been in the United States Army had been in an intense firefight since Vietnam. There have been some battles between, and I'm referring to the Battle of Somalia, which happened 21 years ago, the first week of October, 1993. So I've talked with medical groups, I've talked to some military groups where we went over and analyzed some of the decisions that were made. I've talked to it at churches because, to me, I can't talk about my operation in Mogadishu without my faith coming out. And it's tied together. But I really have never, this is the first time I've talked to a lot of people that I'm looking around, almost everyone I know well. So now let's see how it goes. And again, I try not to bore you with it, but I also think maybe you might be interested in some of the facets. It is a big part of my life, but I think it's more important to pay tribute to the people who partook in it, and especially those who gave their lives in that operation. I still, to this day, I'm talking, referring to, I served 20 years in the Army, and 12 of those years was with a very elite special forces unit called Delta Force at Fort Bragg. I'm only going to speak tonight on that one mission, and while I was very fortunate to be involved in a lot of operations at Delta, there have only been 2 of them that have gotten a lot of notoriety. And that was their first mission, the failed Iranian hostage rescue that was in 1979, that you all remember. And then the second one really was the failed mission, not failed mission, I don't think it was a failed mission. It was a mission without a goal. So when you have a military mission without a goal, you often can't say it was a failure or a success. The heroism of the soldiers was a success. Whether we accomplished anything tactically, you could say it was a failure, perhaps. But those are only two operations that this unit's been involved in that have gotten a lot of notoriety. The unit's still very active all the time, and so I'm going to speak to that. And nothing I'm going to say tonight is classified. I mean, it's all been in public domain. It's been talked over and over. And in fact, you know, when this first happened, after it happened, it was pretty. After the initial rush of it, things moved on, and then there was an author called Mark Bowden, and Mark Bowden wrote the book Black Hawk Down. He had called me and called me and called me. At that time, I was here in practice in Middlebrook and wanted to interview me to talk about what happened, and I would say, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not, I don't talk. The commander of the unit, General Garrison, called me. He said, Marsh, I want you to talk to this author Bowden because he needs to know that our soldiers received the best care they could receive in a combat situation. And so that is the reason he basically told me to talk. So I normally wouldn't, and that's what sort of started the ball rolling. And I talked to him about the book and gave him information. He actually came to Middlebrook and spent 3 days with me and interviewed me and followed me around everywhere I went. I think I'm worn out after the second day. But he got it fairly accurately. And then came, and that was a little bit of rush of activity, and then came the movie. And of course they asked me about the movie, and I said, no, I'm not going to be in the movie. You'll not use my name in the movie. That was not part of the deal of what it was about. And then the movie generated a lot of publicity at a time. And then it sort of came back up again last year when we had our 20th recognition of the Battle of Somalia, Mogadishu. And well, first just let me take you back in time to what orchestrated that battle. Somalia, as you know, is very much now like it was then. It's a country without guidance, without a good government, with a lot of tribes that live within it. There's a lot of sectarian violence. The Somali people themselves, I think, in Africa are not well respected by the other African countries. It's just been a wild country. And at that time, if you recall back in 1993 and 92, then President Bush, in a humanitarian effort, took Americans there to help provide food and supplies to the Somali people who weren't trying not to be involved in the conflict, but the warlords took over. One of the warlords that was most notorious was one General Adid. And General Adid was a very well-educated man. He was educated in our country, and he was at one time employed by the CIA. So he knew how we worked and operated as a military force and as an intelligence force. And General Adid was responsible for attacking a United Nations convoy, a Pakistani convoy, in which 29 people were killed. 29 Pakistani UN soldiers were killed. Then President Clinton, who had just taken office, we're talking the summer of 1993, so President Clinton took office in January of that year. This was Clinton's first military action that he was as president. He decided that he was going to send in the United States Army to capture, not kill, but capture General Adid and bring him to justice. That was the mandate that he gave us. So unlike the mandate to get Osama bin Laden, which was dead or alive, our mandate was to capture alive and bring to trial, which was a new mission for us. We usually our missions are usually dead or alive, and so it was different. This was in the summer, and let me tell you where I'm at this point in time. All right, actually, I don't know if all of you know that Barbara and I actually moved to Middlebrook in 1989, and at that time we lived over at the Austin place by Mount Tabor, and I was still in the Army, and I was still assigned to Delta, but we bought the place, and then we came back after Desert Storm, and we settled there for a couple of years. Barbara worked at King's Daughters, and I was a resident at the university doing family medicine. So at this point in time, I was probably, the Army was sponsoring me to do this. My skills were very good. The commander of Delta, or to-be commander, was General Jerry Boykin, or then Colonel Jerry Boykin, who actually, for those of you who are fans, is a big tech alumnus and went to Virginia Tech. And he came to me, came to Middlebrook and asked me, and asked Barbara and I together, because it was a joint decision, if I would come back to Delta for another tour. They already had 2 tours there. And, you know, of course I jumped at it. I wanted to. This was the best job in the Army for me. You know, it's great. You take care of people, you take care of families, and you get to deploy around the world anytime something comes up. It was exciting. It was not the best job for Barbara, for me, because she has to put up with everything. And at that time we had a baby, so things were different. But she acquiesced for, you know, really, because she knew how that was important for me, and she thought it was important for the country and for the, and Colonel Boykin really assured her that it was really important for the unit. So I was very fortunate to go back to Delta for a 3rd tour. But my skills were really good at that point in time. I mean, I just finished a residency, so I was really at the top of my game, and excited about going back to do another tour there. And I hadn't been at Fort Bragg for more than a month before this mission came down, or the attack, General D's attack, and then the mission, not the Pacific mission, but the overview that get ready to find a way to capture General D. Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about Delta Force, because that sort of plays into this too. You know, because there's a lot of myth about it. Delta was formed by Colonel Charlie Beckwith in the 1970s as a counter-terrorist group. And basically what it does, the way a unit functions is, it picks the best soldiers in the Army and brings them together, tests them. They go through a very rigorous training process, or testing process, and then if accepted, they go through a very rigorous training process and become part of the unit. And most of these soldiers come from a Special Forces or Green Beret background, or maybe a Ranger background or airborne, but occasionally you'll get some there who come from just a General Army. They may have been in a tank unit, or they may have been something else. And they come to Delta and they perform very well. And there's a couple things that make the Delta soldier unique. And I think one of this is intelligence. The other one is their independence and their ability to function on their own and their self-reliance, but also the ability to work together as a team to accomplish a complex goal. So these are good people, and they stay at that unit for as long as they want to. Unlike a regular unit where, you know, they rotate people every 2 to 3 years, and Delta, you can stay there essentially forever, or until you can retire, need to retire. And so this, again, so I was very familiar with the people I was going back to. I've taken care of their families. I had birthed many of their children. It was very much a community like my community here is. It was my patients that I was taking care of, but on the side token, we were also a deployable military force. So the way, and so that's sort of an overview, quick of Delta. Now, with us, we usually also operate with a helicopter unit called the Task Force 160th Night Stalkers out of Fort Campbell. And these are, just like we're probably the best soldiers in the Army, these are the best pilots in the Army, and they've been hand-selected to fly. And they fly primarily Black Hawk aircraft, and they fly Little Birds, which are Huey aircraft, which serve as gunships and observation ships. And when we deploy, we always take with us 8 large Black Hawk helicopters and 6 Little Bird helicopters, as well as all their support unit. When we deploy at Delta, personally, our unit is probably anywhere from 75 soldiers and maybe 25 support people. Like it would be me and 5 medics and some combo people. So 100 operation people, maybe 5 or 6 leadership. Very lean, try to be very lean, and mainly try to, as much of the fighting force as we can. When I deploy, I also arrange for with us, because you know there are going to be casualties, a medical package to be in the rear to provide some surgical support. It's usually 1 or 2 surgeons, an orthopedic surgeon, anesthesiologist, maybe an ER doctor, to help us back up, and they're always in a secure area on a different aircraft that may come several days later, but often, sometimes the same day, depending on things. And that's how we deploy. We're also often augmented by ranger units, which are conventional forces. These are guys who go to get special training, and they jump out of airplanes and they do a lot of special forces training, but they're more conventionally oriented, and they provide a lot of security for us. Because we're being a small force ourselves, we can't do that, and they provide that. Well, the mission to get General Deed actually was shaping up to be pretty good. He was smart, and he was hiding very low in Mogadishu, and he was not able to find him. The Central Intelligence Agency did not have good human sources on the ground, but they did have a contact who knew General Deed and was going to have a meeting with him. And what the CIA did, they made, General Deed always carried a cane, so the CIA made up a walking stick. I never saw it, but I was told of it, and it had a gold inlay on it, and inside it had a radio transmitter. So, the plan was this, obviously. He was going to get, the operative was going to give General Deed the radio transmitter, which would be turned on. The Deed takes the transmitter, we're going to be in the area, bang, go get him, come out, be home. I told Barbara I'd be home in 72 hours. He said, okay. I didn't tell her what the mission was, but I said, hey, we're getting deployed, I'll be home 72 hours, you know. Normally when something like this happens, we usually deploy to an aircraft carrier or an amphibious launching ship, so we will be protected and will be more of a surprise. But because this was so time sensitive, there was not a large naval vessel anywhere near the Horn of Africa at that time where we needed to be. So the guys would come up with these plans and said, well, look, let's deploy them right into Somalia at the airport where there's already an American contingent. And they said, well, gosh, you know, if we deploy all these helicopters and stuff, and these guys have long hair and stuff, and it's going to be right off they're there to get somebody, this is Delta Forces, because CNN's right there. So, you know, the news is going to be out. So, like I said, well, let's deploy as a ranger unit. And so we all got ranger haircuts, and they actually attached a 100-man ranger unit to us, and we went to Somalia under the name of Task Force Ranger, with our mission to be to help security with the UN. And of course, when we arrived there, CNN was there, and all the cameras were there, and that was our mission. Unfortunately, while we were in flight to Somalia, our operative, the man who was going to give the cane with the radio tracking device, got into a game, literally, of Russian roulette and shot himself in the head. So by the time when we arrived, we learned that, and so now we had no mission. I mean, we had a mission, but we had no plan. We did not know where he was. This agency did not know any idea where Adid was. And Adid, you know, we as Americans, sometimes we tend to underestimate our enemy. And he was a fox. I mean, I'll give him credit. He knew how we operated, and we were using it. So he didn't do any of that. He was very careful. He hid everywhere. It was hard to find him. So then we just said, okay, we're going to develop a mission. We're going to go out and we're going to flush him out. Just sort of, we just did random hits in the city of Somalia. We'd get little leads, and we'd load up in our helicopters, and we'd go there, and we'd fast rope down, and maybe we'd capture 1 or 2 people. But our goal was to stir him up, to get him to make a mistake, so that we could find him. And we did this for 2 months, and fairly successfully, but it was clear that we were imprinting a pattern of how we were operating out of that airfield. Now also, as you realize, Somalia is just, the enemy was all around you. It's, you know, I guess, let me backtrack, you know, why do we still talk about this little mission that happened 21 years ago. Why does this get, and I'll tell you why, there's several reasons why. One is, you know, it obviously had no tactical strategic impact, unlike the Battle of the Bulge or D-Day or anything else, so things like that. But it was the first big military operation that the Army had been in. I mean, we're the firefighting, I'll get into that in a little bit. So secondly, it also was the first time that we have come up against our new enemy. And we didn't realize it at the time, but bin Laden was feeding money, weapons, supplies to Somalis. So this is what we retroactively, I mean, after intelligence people were looking at this, they realized Al-Qaeda was starting right there in Somalia. This was America's first chance to see its enemy. And it was a different enemy than we have fought before. One that was ruthless, one that didn't care about its own people, they got killed or did a suicide bomb, one that didn't care about civilians, and one that was sort of ambiguous. It was all around us. And all around an airfield, there were the enemy, though we couldn't see them, couldn't tell that. You didn't know that they were there, but they were there. And so they saw what we were doing, and it became very, I think, plain to them how we were operating. Well, one Sunday morning, and it was October the 3rd, we got word that General Adid and several of his lieutenants were at a hotel in Somalia having a meeting. And this was our chance. Well, you don't have time to verify. You're just going to go, you know, we had a template that we used. So within a few minutes, the helicopters were ramped up, soldiers were loaded, medics were there. I'd gotten our aid station together, ready to go, and the hit started to go down. I'm not sure to this day whether we were going into an ambush. You know, at the time we didn't think of that, but retrospectively, I don't know if we were going into an ambush or actually we just happened to go right into the center of the hornet's nest. And it just happened to turn out the way it did. Because I think General Adid was smart enough to set up an ambush for us. I still give him that credit, but you know, others say, oh, no, it just happened to be. So let me go a little bit over how this operation went down, if you don't remember. I don't want to get too tactical, but basically the role of the mission was the bulk of the Delta Force were on the big Black Hawk helicopters and the Little Birds. And the Rangers were on several of the Black Hawk helicopters, but mainly on vehicles that were going to drive into the area once the site was secured and take away the prisoners and anybody else that needed to. When the hits started to go down and the helicopters would come around, fly over, and the guys would throw out large ropes, and we would fast rope down and get on the ground as fast as we can. Right when it was starting, the first problem that we had was one of the young Rangers, not Delta guys, but Ranger guys who was supposed to be in a security area on the periphery, apparently either thought the helicopter was on fire or the dust blinded his eyes or what, or he got excited, but he didn't hold on to the rope and he fell about 25 feet to the ground and was severely injured, but not critically injured, but severely injured. And one of my medics went to him and gave me a full report, and I made a decision, let's hold him in place till we get this operation done, and then we'll move him. However, this soldier's Ranger commander said, no, let's get him back. And a little bit of that attitude was, you know, this is how we train. When someone gets hurt in training, you stop everything and you take them back. Well, unfortunately, I think that was what they were thinking and not holding the patient. But anyway, they decided to move him back. Well, when they did that, that disrupted all the flow. I'm not saying the thing would not have gone bad if that hadn't happened, but it was the first omen of what was going to happen. And then as the guys went down and started to secure the area, it became very obvious that we were getting surrounded or very, very quickly. And there was a lot of firing occurring from, not from the target site, but from outside the target site into where the hit was going down. And let me back up again. A week earlier, there was a conventional military helicopter that was shot down in Mogadishu. And we didn't really realize, we realized they did not have anti-aircraft weapons. How did they shoot down that helicopter? And after the investigation, it was, well, an RPG round was fired at the helicopter. An RPG round is sort of like a bazooka round, and they fired from their shoulder, it's eyesighted, there's no heat-seeking thing to it. And they thought, well, it just must have been a lucky shot that they hit that helicopter. Well, as it turns out, it wasn't a lucky, I mean, it was a well-planned shot. What they learned to do is, if they took 10 people with 10 RPGs, and they all aimed them in the same area, like a shotgun blast, and all fired at the same time, your probability of getting a hit on a helicopter is probably pretty good. And that's what they learned to do. And it became painfully obvious that that was their new tactic. The second problem we had is our helicopter pilots, like I told you, are the best pilots in the world. They're extremely brave, and their goal is to always do the mission. And we've worked closely together year after year, mission after mission. They were like family. When they saw our guys on the ground without a lot of support and all this enemy coming in towards us, to surrounding us, they came down at a low level because of their guns, the M60 machine guns on either side of it, and were providing air support for us, much like you would call in a jet fighter. There were no jet fighters to call in. So this was it. I mean, we had no backup forces. And so they were coming down and providing close air support to us. Well, it's one thing to fly a Black Hawk helicopter in the middle of the black night with goggles on and no one can see you, but those things stand out pretty easily on an African blue sky. You know, those black helicopters, they stand out there, and that was an easy target for the Somalis. And they fired the first blast, and the first helicopters, we call them supers, Super 6.6 went down. And it went down about 100 feet, 200 feet from where, well, maybe 300 feet from where the hit was going. When I got word that first helicopter went down, my stomach turned upside down because I knew that things were not going the way they were supposed to be going. And then we started getting casualties, and I wasn't as involved in the tactical part of it as I was at the beginning because casualties were coming in and that was my job. But shortly thereafter, a second helicopter, Super 6.4, got shot down, doing the same thing. And it landed deep into the city, maybe 2 miles from where we were. So now we have 2 downed aircraft at 2 different locations. We got maybe 150, 175 people surrounded by Somalis and we're going down at a hit, and we're in the middle of an ambush, or what seemed like an ambush at that time from 360 degrees, and we're taking casualties of our own, plus we're having Somali casualties. And I remember when the Rangers brought to me the first load of casualties on a truck that they came up to my aid station, and I just remember opening that gate and just blood coming out. You know, it was like, these were casualties. And so my role at that point in time was to provide obviously care to our soldiers there. And it was tough because these were guys that, you know, I've known for 10 years, knew their family, took care of their kids, and you know, you have to make those decisions of who gets life support and who doesn't. And there were some devastating injuries that I had to make decisions on that we couldn't provide care because I only had limited resources. And unfortunately, it was hard to get the casualties back to our secure hospital because we were in the middle of a firefight. And the ones I could send back, I'd only have to send a few at a time because it was a very small, hospital units. I couldn't want to overwhelm me, so I had to try to keep as many casualties as I could. And it was a long period. And the medics that I had hired did a superb job. And I could feel comfortable telling people this, that we had, at that operation, we had 18 killed. And of the 18 killed, only one could have possibly been saved. And he was at a remote site that we could not get to, and he was bleeding internally, and we could not get to them. And that was all the others that were killed with such a devastating injury, they were not survivable. It was not survivable. We had countless other casualties that we took care of that did survive, and I think it was a credit to the medics and the surgeons back at the base that saved their lives. And this went on through now, you recall, we were training for these little quick things. We didn't mean to be there for more than 15 minutes on target. And here it was, 7 hours on target, and we're still engaged. So we're starting to run out of ammo, we're starting to run out of water. Now it's starting to turn night, and we didn't take any night vision goggles with us, like we usually do, because we were in the middle of daylight mission when things started at 12 noon. And so now it's getting dark, and so we're trying to regroup. Now let me back up again about Super 6-4, the other helicopter that went down deep into the city. Helicopter Super 6-2 started to fly over. And on that helicopter were 3 snipers, 3 Delta snipers, and then the 2 machine gunners. And they were providing air support to that down helicopter, hoping that maybe we could get some people in. Well, it was obvious that we were involved in such a firefight there, we couldn't get there. We wanted to. I mean, we wanted to, but we couldn't. We were trying to secure the first helicopter going down and take care of the ambush site. And the senior Delta operator on that helicopter asked the commander to go in. The commander said, "You can go in, but we're not going to be able to come get you for 12 hours." But he said, I think maybe you should not go in, stay on the helicopter. Well, that was not an acceptable answer. There were 3 men on that helicopter, and it was Sergeant Gordon and Sergeant Shugart and Sergeant Hawley. Hawley was being the youngest guy. Gordon made a decision that Hawley would stay, he and Shugart would go down to the crash site. So they fast rode down to the crash site to provide support for that helicopter, because it was apparent that the pilot and the crew chiefs, the 2 gunners, were alive. And they fought off a barrage of Somalis. I don't know how many. I've heard large numbers were killed, but the net result, the site was eventually overrun. One of the pilots was captured, that was Michael Durant. The others were killed, and Gordon and Shugart were killed at that site. They later were awarded the Medal of Honor. It was the first Medal of Honor that was awarded to American soldiers since Vietnam at that time. So that was another big factor, but because they went in, knowing that there would be no help to come out. At that same time, Sergeant Hawley was firing up above. His helicopter took the RPG shotgun round, and it hit the tail fin, and one round went inside the helicopter and killed the gunner and took off Sergeant Hawling's leg. Sergeant Hawling was able to make his own tourniquet, put it on, and then took up the machine gun and kept firing as the helicopter limped away to base and then crashed. A 4th helicopter, who was also attempting to help, was shot down, but was able to limp back in to the airfield. So remember I told you we had started with 8 Black Hawk helicopters? We're down to 4 right now. Still have the Little Birds. General Garrison made a decision, no more helicopters. I'm grounded in the helicopters. We're not flying anymore. Because again, he knew the mentality of those pilots. They would keep going in until they got shot down. So they couldn't fly anymore. So he made a tough decision not to fly. But it was that was the right decision. So we then attempted to make a rescue force to try. At that time, by the time it got dark, the force was able to get out of the ambush site and reestablish ourselves. And then our next mission was to go get the first helicopter site and maybe try to hit the second helicopter site deep in the city. One of our commanders was able to get some of the Egyptians and Malaysian soldiers who were there with the UN to come with us and help us. They were not eager to go out and fight at night, but they were coaxed into that, and it was a real credit that they could put a force like that together. And so we went to get these other guys, and again, we lost one man who we couldn't get there in time, but everyone else, we were able to get everybody except the ones at that last helicopter site. By the time we reached that helicopter site, no one was there. The helicopter was gone, there were no bodies, nothing was there. You'll remember in horror the photos that came out at the time of American bodies that were burned and dragged through the streets of Somalia. Those were the 3 crewmen and the 2 Delta operatives that were there. Durant was now a prisoner somewhere in Somalia. Well, as we regrouped early that Monday morning, because it's now Monday morning and we've been fighting all night, we rendezvoused at a large soccer stadium that the Chinese had built in Somalia. And Somalia, if you can see pictures, it still exists out. It's less than a third world country. It's little huts. And you have this monumental stadium that looks like it's as good as any NFL stadium right there in the center, because the Chinese want to make their impression by, we're going to build you instead of going in and building them a hospital or a school, they're going to build them a stadium, because that brings the Chinese a lot of notoriety to do that. So they built this beautiful stadium. Well, we said, well, that would be our rendezvous point. So we set up our aid station there, and then the rest of the casualties came to me at the Pakistani stadium. The problem I had was, we were also with some Pakistanis, and they kept wanting to take our casualties and treat them. I was very adamant that the Americans stay with the Americans, and I let the Pakistanis and the Egyptians take care of the foreign casualties that we had with us, and some of them were our prisoners. I don't want to go into the details of all that happened, but it was a really long day, and by early Sunday morning, we had finally treated everybody. The helicopters, General Garrison felt were secure enough that he allowed them to land, and we loaded up our casualties, and I kept as many as I could because I didn't want to flood the hospital with too many at one time, but I decided who we could treat ourselves at our own compound and who we need to go to the hospital. But by this point in time, it's 7 in the morning, and the last helicopter is getting ready to take off, and I was the last guy there with the commander because it was just time to go, and I wanted to stay there till the end. And I remember then how dejected I felt. And I remember I was in my battle fatigues, and I remember they felt starched. You know how you wear a pair of, you guys have been ironing starched? Well, they were starched with blood. That's what starched them. And I remember I could hardly move them because they were so tight from people. These were my comrades' blood. And I was dejected at that time. I won't say I had a little pity party, but I just felt bad. I was upset at my country for not supporting us. I was upset at my God for allowing this to happen. And as I got in that helicopter with my little pity party, the helicopter took up, and then I saw something that got my eye. The sunrise was occurring over the Indian Ocean, and the clouds were there, low level, maybe 1,000 feet. And you know how it is when the sun comes up here around the mountains, and the clouds there, and it's just really bright, and it's just beautiful, and the sun was glistening off the 10 huts. Actually, for a moment of time, I thought it was a very beautiful surrounding, and it just impressed me that this is still God's world. And God takes care of us, and He didn't make this happen, but He's in control. And it just reassessed my faith. Before all that thing went down, I want to make this clear. I was an ordinary guy who did some extraordinary things with the power of prayer. I mean, besides, I spent a lot of time praying during my little breaks because that's the only thing I could do to get going. And it was God's will that things happened like they did, and that people were saved in my mind. I'm convinced that the things I did, the decisions I made, I look back on it, I'm not that smart a guy to make those decisions. God made those decisions for me. Those people were saved that were saved. And so as I held her prayer, I felt better about that. But I was still ticked at my country. Why did this happen? And then as we flew back to the airfield, I saw something that resonates with me and will for the rest of my life. It was 2 American flags on the back of the tail fins of 2 C-141 aircraft that were star-lifting aircraft that were brought in, the Air Force brought in from Landstuhl, Germany, with special medical teams to evac our boys out. They assembled those at night. They found crews. They put them together. These were not hospital ships. They made them hospital ships overnight, and they brought them into Somalia. And we had platforms that we could put our guys on to bring them back. And that just reminded me that, things may have gone bad, but our country's going to be there for our guys. And, all of our soldiers, a lot of them lost limbs. They recovered. And it's interesting, a lot of the technology right now that with limbs, one of the premier guys was Sergeant Hawley. The guy I told you about had his leg blown off. He wanted to stay in the Army. He's the first person who's ever allowed to stay in the Army with an above-the-knee amputation. And he sort of pushed and pioneered prosthetic devices, which are utilized now. There have been some positive outcomes of what happened, and I'll go over those in a little bit, so that it wasn't just a loss of life like you would think that it was. When some of it was, by the time I got back there on Sunday, my job now was to sort out the casualties, because the Army mentality at that point in time was if you were hurt, you go back to the rear. Well, I couldn't have that. We were still at war. The enemy was there. We know we have at least one guy that's captive, maybe more, so we're going to have to go get him. We could not afford to send people back who had minor or moderate injuries. So my job then became to go on that airplane and decide who goes off and who stays. Of course, everybody wanted to come off. They all wanted to come back off and fight more, but there were those who actually needed to be on there and to get out. But we needed to keep together a force together. We had to resupply ourselves. We knew we had reinforcements coming, but they're coming from the United States, and it's going to be another 12 to 18 hours before they come on site. So it was a busy time, and then there were the casualties identified. It was how I got through that last 48 hours, I don't know, but the Lord got me through it. A little bit of postscript. I was standing. I got through the Somalia battle without a scratch. And it was on, this was Monday night, Tuesday night, so this is October the 5th, battle was October the 3rd, 4th, it is October the 5th, and I'm standing with the commander, the sergeant major, the deputy commander, another sergeant major, in a little circle, and we're talking about our plans for the future, for going back in and trying to find Officer Durant. And just then, Sergeant Rarish walks up to me right here, and 30 seconds later, a mortar round comes down right in our group. And I don't know how they were so lucky to fire a round right into the command group. I think actually it was intended for somewhere else, and it just happened. It was short, and it just first round. Well. It hit the commander, the sergeant major, the deputy commander, and it took out the doctor, and Sergeant Rarish, who walked up to me, it killed him. Had he not been there, I don't think I'd be here. That was something that happened. And at that point in time, I don't remember much. When I came to, I remember I had pre-positioned medical supplies around the compound in case something would happen. And I remember when I came to where I was at, and so I tried to crawl there, and one of my medics found me. And he put the mask trousers on and revived me, and we got things together, and I could even make some medical decisions about things. And then I myself became a casualty and was sent back. And I was pretty severely injured. You know, not going into details, I got hit pretty hard. And I got sent to launch stool. I was on a ventilator. I don't remember any of that. The last thing I remember was actually when I got flown to the military support hospital I brought in Somalia. And John Holcomb, a surgeon, looked at me and said, "Rob, where do you think you hit?" I said, "I hurt my belly." And I had these big mask trousers on. It was like a big blood pressure cuff on your lower bottom to hold the blood in. And he said, "Well, I'm going to take down the mask trousers." I said, "Okay." Well, that's the last thing I remember. Next thing I remember, I woke up in Landstuhl, Germany, in the hospital there after a couple of surgeries. And that was after several days. But just to backtrack a little bit, you know, and this gets on the other side of the coin too. Of course, in this day and age of information, everybody back home knows what's happening instantly as it's happening. And I just can imagine how difficult it was for those families left behind when now they know where their husband's at and they know what's going on and what's happening. And this has been the first big combat that's gone bad in a long, long time in this country at that point in time. And I know how hard it was for Barbara when that unit van drove up to the house, because they don't come there, they don't drive your house unless it's something really bad. And that was just, I wasn't there, but I can just imagine how difficult that was for her. The Army did fly her to Germany to be with me because I was critically injured. And that was a difficult time. But I'll tell you, something else happened then. And I wasn't expected to make it. They were not as very close. I told you before I was living here. I mean, I just how long ago it was. I remember when I was driving to UVA, I would cut through Greenville, through Stewart Strap, and hit 64, and it was only a flashing light in Stewart Strap. You know, that's how long ago that was. But we were active members of Hebron, and Hebron Church heard about my casualty, and they had a 24-hour prayer vigil. And I'm convinced that that prayer vigil is what saved my life. I'm convinced that's what it did. And I will never be told otherwise, you know. And General Boykin told me he prayed for me. A lot of people prayed for me, and that's what saved me. And that's one of the really the big reason why I decided to come back into Middlebrook practice. And you know, it took a 60mm mortar round to change my life and to redirect what I wanted to do. You know, and I was still able to stay with the unit and still able to do things with the unit for a couple of years, and I had some more surgeries, and I recovered, and I was able to come back here. Now, as far as what's the good that came out of that, there was, I mean, we had 98 casualties, but we learned a lot. All right, I think we learned some things medically, and we made improvements. Well, one is we learned about our new enemy. And we learned our new enemy had different tactics, and we need to adapt and be prepared for it. And I think this is one reason why we were so successful initially when we went into Afghanistan and Iraq. Secondly, we need to have different weapon systems, improve our weapon systems and our tactics. And that was done. And so we had the guys worked on different tactics, the way to fight this new enemy. You know, they learned out of that. Thirdly, we needed to have better body armor. We took 98 casualties. That 18 killed, 98, I mean, in 98, that's, for a fighting force of 150, 175, that's a lot. And so we needed to have better body armor. So better helmets were developed, better vests were developed, and they're still working on that, but that paved the way for that to happen, and I think it resulted in a far less casualties and our subsequent battles in Afghanistan and Iraq. On the medical side, we looked for ways to improve how we could deliver care, and maybe artificial things to stop bleeding better, and new tourniquets. And in fact, one of the things that came out of it was what a lot of you who do EMS, you come to the office, this little device here where you can measure your pulse and your oxygen. It was available then, but it was a big bulky unit. You couldn't deploy it. You know, Army research dollars were used to spend to come up with something that would be a medic could take in the field with him. And this is one of the results of that. And there were a lot of things that came of that. So, you know, it was a battle with a lot of casualties and without a great tactical end. You know, and then you don't have General D. Well, as it turned out, we made a deal with General D. The warrant officer, Michael Durant, was released. They gave him back up. General D signed a truce with the United States. He later was diagnosed with prostate cancer, was flown to Johns Hopkins at taxpayer expense, and was treated for prostate cancer. Later went back to Somalia and died of prostate cancer. You know, that's how things go. You know, but you know what was benefit? Maybe some of the things that we had happened for a reason and prepared us better for the battles ahead that we were going to fight. And that just sort of brings me up to closing now, you know, in the postscript of it again, you know, what else do we come out of this? I think we need to, it's hard to appreciate how hard it is now for our soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq. Also how hard it is for their families left back. And so I think we need to have a greater appreciation for that. I think when soldiers come back now, it's going to be a tougher time for them economically. You know, there's a downsizing in the military now. There was a build-up, but now we're downsizing. Even though the combat operations team more, so people are going to be coming out. You know, they need to be reintroduced. I'll tell you this community was instrumental in my mental recovery. You may not realize it, but you guys were responsible for me making my recovery back, and you accepted me into this community and accepted Barbara in this community, and that was really part of mine. And one reason I like it reminded me in a lot of ways of why I was at Delta. Oh, we don't do any combat operations, but it's the people. I took care of the best people in the Army and their families, and I was very proud of that. And I had that opportunity to do that here in this community. You know, very individualistic people, a lot of different variety of types, but who live on their own and go their way, but can unite together for common purposes at common times. And that's a lot what this community is, and that's what it helped me make my recovery to come back here. That's when it made it much easier for me. It's like we need to be cognizant of that with other veterans that come, you know, when they come back to help them to reintroduce. And then, you know, it sort of, for me, cemented my faith more, you know, because I know I wouldn't be here or couldn't have done the things that I did without God's hand. And so it's made me a stronger, better person. So I'm trying to think of something I missed talking about, Jerry. I said what I usually said at the roof of the thing. Okay. All right. I appreciate holding y'all. I mean, up to I didn't mean to talk this long, but it was a big event and part of my life, and I'm very proud to have been associated with those soldiers that I have had the opportunity to take care of and fight with. But I'm also very proud to be here in this community with you all. And I think what I like to do, if we could just, yes, Jerry.
I want to thank each and every one of y'all for showing up tonight and giving Dr. Marsh the support and the Reuben Club the support to come and listen to him. And when we talked the other day, he said 30 minutes. He spoke for 30 minutes. There will be refreshments at the end of this. Dr. Marsh is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. But first, there's a special presentation with Diane LaVoy from the Quilts of Valor. Come forward, please.
My name's Diane LaVoy, and I am with the Quilts of Valor group in Parnassus, Virginia, the little town between Bridgewater and Churchville on Route 42, a church on top of the hill. We're here tonight representing the Quilts of Valor organization. It's a national group that was founded in 2003 by a Catherine Roberts. Catherine's son was deployed to Iraq. and he was a gunner sitting atop a Humvee, is how she put it. She, like many of us with sons and daughters in the military, in war zones, was very worried about him. And then one night had a vision and saw a soldier struggling with his own experiences at 2 in the morning. And she saw him wrapped in a quilt that brought him comfort. From that, the Quilts of Valor Foundation was formed. Catherine had this idea that she could connect quilters and long armers, the people who do long arm quilting for us to help us finish our quilts, connect them throughout the country to help realize her dream of presenting quilts of valor to all the soldiers returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. This was a reminder for each of them that we were grateful for their service, for their sacrifices to our country, and for their valor. Since 2003, over 108 quilts have been awarded. 108,000, quilts have been awarded. They keep track of me. These are my bosses. And to personnel who now include active military, as well as vets from World War II, Korea, Beirut, Somalia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. There have been wounds, both seen and unseen, that these quilts have helped to heal, and we have seen some of that ourselves. One recipient said, "My quilt is not just another military medal to be placed in a box and on a shelf." Our group here in Parnassus has created 82 quilts since we started in 2012. Keep it straight. With the most recent one going to Germany to a USO unit, and that was going to be awarded, will be awarded to a wounded soldier who will be flying home to Walter Reed for treatment. We have awarded quilts to Iraq and Afghanistan through VA hospitals facilities here in the States, to Post Fort Riley, and to Fort Campbell here in the States. And we've sent quilts to hospitals in Germany and Afghanistan. Locally, we have awarded quilts